Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Las Vegas Bowl, played December 19th, 2015, between the Brigham Young Cougars and the Utah Utes. So the Cougars versus the Utes, and we're going to go over the scores and some stats and give our breakdown and analysis. And this was a wild one right off the rip. A lot of turnovers right in the first quarter. We saw 4 turnovers by the Cougars, starting off on their first possession on 3rd and 14 from the 21. Tanner Magnum would fumble the ball, and it was forced by Kylie Fitz and recovered by Gianni Paul. So now Utah would take over on the BYU 25, and they would get down to the 5-yard line, and on a 4th and 1, they ran the ball for a 4 yards. Joe Williams for the first down. And then on 1st and goal from the 1, Joe Williams scored on a 1-yard touchdown run. Andy Phillips hit the extra point, and it was 7-0 Utah over BYU. So now the Cougars would get the ball back, and on their first play of their next possession, Tanner Magnum intercepted by Tevin Carter, and he returns it 28 yards for the pick 6. Andy Phillips adds the extra point, and it was now 14-0 Utes over the Cougars. So now BYU would get the ball for the 3rd possession of this game, and they would end up getting the ball to their own 32. And on 3rd and 4, Tanner Magnum intercepted once again by Tevin Carter. He returns it 33 yards all the way to the 1, almost another pick 6 for Carter. But the Utes would take over 1st and goal on the 1. They give it to Joe Williams. He punches it in for the touchdown. Andy Phillips adds the extra point, and it was 21-0 Utah over BYU. So now the Cougars would get the ball back. They would get it close to midfield. They got up to the 42, but on 2nd and 10, Tanner Magnum was intercepted, this time by Dominque Hatfield, and Hatfield returns it 46 yards for the pick 6. Phillips adds the extra point, and it was 28-0. So right there, that's 4 turnovers, and it was actually, they weren't done yet. Is now on the second play of the next possession on 1st and 10 from the 38. Squally Canada fumbles the ball, recovered by Utah. That's the 5th turnover in the first quarter. So now the Utes would take over on the BYU 39. Then after picking up a first down, they'd end up faced with a 3rd and 3 from the 20. And Travis Wilson takes it himself as he ends up running 20 yards for the touchdown. Phillips adds the extra point, and now it's 35-0 Utah in the lead over BYU. And BYU would end up going for a field goal on their next possession, and they would miss that field goal and end up turning the ball over after the missed field goal, a 44-yard attempt. And now these two teams would just trade punts until in the second quarter, with about just over half a minute, less than a minute left before halftime, Tanner Magnum hit Remington Peck for a 3-yard touchdown. Sampson added the extra point, and now the Cougars were finally on the board right before the intermission, with the score now Utah 35, BYU 7. So that was the score at halftime. Then in the third quarter, with about 10 minutes still left in the third, Francis Bernard runs it 10 yards for the touchdown. Sampson adds the extra point. Now it's 35-14. Then in the fourth quarter, Tanner Magnum would hit Nick Kurtz for a 5-yard touchdown with 10.5 minutes left in this game. Sampson added the extra point. Now it's 35-21. Then with 3.5 minutes left to play, Tanner Magnum scores on a 4-yard touchdown. He extends and gets in the end zone. And with the extra point by Sampson, it was now 35-28. So after being down 35-0, the BYU Cougars come back to make it a 1-score game with 3.5 left to play, just under 3.5 left to play. And so now Utah would take over after the kickoff, which actually went out of bounds, so they took over at the 35, and now they would just give the ball to Joe Williams, and Joe Williams would run out the clock, and that would do it for the Cougars. As the Utes win this one, they win the Las Vegas Bowl 35-28. So Utah, they got up to that big lead early on, as they forced those 5 turnovers in the first quarter. They had the 3 interceptions and the 2 fumbles, and that would lead to 35 points. Of course, 2 defensive touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns for Utah in this game. And then they just sat on their lead. BYU, they fought their way back in it, but really, Utah, you saw once it came down to a 1-score game, they just ran out the clock. So they never trailed at any point. This game was really never in question. I mean, good effort by the Cougars to at least make it interesting, to bring it within a score, but really, this game was all Utah. They just jumped out that huge lead, and that really took the air out of the stadium right there. So Utah with a big win. And Travis Wilson, he threw for less than 100 yards. That's why Tanner Magnum threw for over 300. But Travis Wilson was 9 of 16, just 71 passing yards. He also had 15 carries for 23 rushing yards and that rushing touchdown. That was the one that made it 35-0. Joe Williams had 25 carries for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 receptions for 22 yards as he was the leading receiver for the Utes and their leading rusher. So big day for Williams, who ended up with 113 total yards on the day. And then for BYU, Tanner Magnum, those 3 interceptions in the first quarter, 2 of which went back for touchdowns. The other one just 1 yard shy of being 3 pick sixes. But he was 25 for 56 with 315 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And Francis Bernard had 7 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown. Magnum also had 11 carries for 3 yards and that rushing touchdown. So 3 total touchdowns for Magnum. And then Devin Blackman, 3 catches for 97 yards. And Terren Hook had 6 catches for 68 yards. Nick Kurtz, 4 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. So Magnum doing his best to try to bring him back in it. But Tevin Carter with those 2 interceptions, and that led to 14 points for Utah. Also, Dominque Hatfield had a pick 6 as well. As the Utes, their defense just all over BYU. And of course, BYU historically has always been a pass-heavy team, as they've had some prolific passers come out of there. Steve Young, even Trent Dilfer, or not Trent Dilfer, Ty Dillinger. No, Ty Dilfer? Anyway, correct me in the comment section on that one, but in this game, Utah wins at 35-28 in the Las Vegas Bowl. That is the final score. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.